I didn't leave because I was strong. I left because staying meant slowly forgetting who I was. The silence in the cabin wasn't peaceful. It scraped at me, like wind through broken glass, like an empty room after someone slammed the door shut for the last time. I came here to breathe, but I was gasping. The pines outside stood still, tall and indifferent, like guardians of someone else's life. Inside, everything smelled of wood and dust. The bed was too wide, the air too thin, and I was too aware of the shape I no longer filled beside me. It had been 13 months since Ryan left. 13. Why does pain count in such perfect numbers? He moved on so easily. A new woman with a younger laugh and tighter skin. Meanwhile, I'd spent a year trying to remember how to laugh at all. I tried to read, tried to write, tried to birdwatch like he used to. But even the birds stayed out of sight that morning. So I poured wine into a mug that used to hold coffee, because rules don't matter when you're trying to forget time. And I watched the trees, waiting for something to move, for something to break, for anything. Then a shout, sharp, frantic male. My mug clattered to the floor before I even realized I stood up. The voice came again, clearer, somewhere near the ridge. I opened the door. The wind met me like an accusation, but I walked into it, barely thinking, just moving. Hello. My voice cracked on its way out, no answer, only rustling then. Over here. Deeper in, the voice was warm, even through panic. Branches clawed at my coat as I followed the sound. My boots sank in damp leaves. My breath puffed like ghosts in the cold. He was there, crumpled on the forest floor, one hand clutching his ankle, his flannel shirt torn, his face flushed and drawn. I took a step forward. Are you hurt? He looked up, eyes dark like the soil, rimmed with pain and something else, something wild. Yeah, he said, teeth gritted. Just twisted it, I think. He tried to sit up, failed, fell back. I knelt beside him. His breath smelled of cold pine. His skin radiated heat like a coal under snow. You're not walking anywhere tonight, I said, steadier than I felt. I have a cabin not far. He met my eyes, held them, and nodded. Then I guess I'm yours for a while. I didn't answer, because deep down, in the place I never let anyone touch, I already knew he wasn't mine. But I was about to become his. I didn't leave because I was brave. I left because the silence in my apartment started sounding like my own heartbeat. Too loud, too lonely, too mine. Brooklyn had become a ghost town I lived in, not because it was empty, but because everything there reminded me of what I no longer was. A wife, a woman desired, a person who belonged to someone. So I came here to a cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains, North Carolina, rented for a month. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, just trees. And time, I thought I'd find peace. But peace is just silence when you haven't made friends with yourself. The first morning, the fireplace was cold. The floorboards creaked like they missed someone heavier. The coffee was bitter. I sat wrapped in a blanket I didn't remember packing. My phone had no service, no notifications. Not that I expected any. Ryan hadn't texted in almost 7 months. Not since he posted a photo with her, a 20-something with flawless teeth and no shadow of stretch marks. He used to say I was his home. Funny how fast men move when they find a prettier house. I looked out the window. The pines stood like soldiers, quiet, stubborn, unimpressed. The double bed behind me yawned empty. I hadn't touched the right pillow since the divorce. I kept it cold, like proof, like punishment. I thought about walking, but even the trail looked like a dead end. So I poured wine into a chipped mug. It was 11:42 a.m. I wasn't trying to drink. I was trying to remember what it felt like to be held, not just touched, held. A bird flitted past the window, bright red. A cardinal, maybe. Ryan used to love bird watching. Said it made him feel like time slowed down. I didn't want time to slow. I wanted it to leap forward, to skip over the ache, to the part where I was someone new. I sipped, closed my eyes. And then a shout, muffled, far male. I froze. The mug tipped from my hand and hit the rug with a soft thud. Wine seeped into the fibers like blood. Another shout, clearer this time, urgent. I was up before I could think. Flinging the door open, cold air slapped my face. The trees swayed slightly, whispering secrets. Hello. My voice sounded unfamiliar, thinner. There it was again. I need help. No hesitation, no logic. I grabbed my coat and stepped off the porch. Leaves crunched beneath my boots. The forest swallowed me quickly. A blur of brown and gray and pine. Branches scratched at my jeans. My breath came out in puffs, like little ghosts. The air tasted like smoke and damp moss. Then I saw him, collapsed against a fallen log, his ankle bent at an angle that made my stomach twist. He looked up, dark hair, flannel shirt streaked with dirt, eyes like something wild. You're hurt, I said. He nodded, tried to sit up. Failed. His breath came sharp, twisted it. He winced. Tried to take a shortcut back to camp. Dumb idea. I knelt beside him. My hand hovered near his arm, unsure. The heat from his body startled me. You're not going anywhere on that foot, I said quietly. I've got a place, just up the hill. You can rest there. He looked at me, really looked. Not like men do when they're assessing, but like he was trying to decide whether I was real. Are you sure? I wouldn't offer if I wasn't. He smiled, a crooked half apology of a smile. Then I guess I'm yours for the evening. Something inside me fluttered, old wings unused. I helped him up slowly. His weight leaned into me, heavy but warm. Like the gravity I didn't know I missed, we walked back, step by slow step, each one peeling something back inside me, until the cabin came into view. Until I realized I wasn't cold anymore. He was heavier than I expected, not in weight, in presence. There was something about Nathan Cole that made the air between us feel denser, charged. His arm draped over my shoulders, not out of want, but necessity. Yet it stirred something in me I wasn't ready to name. We moved slowly, carefully. The forest no longer seemed so vast, only full of small obstacles, roots, rocks, uneven dirt. each one forcing us closer. "I didn't mean to scare you," he said, voice tight with pain. "I thought I could make it back before sunset." "You almost didn't," I replied, trying to keep my breath steady. "Lucky for you, I'm not great at ignoring distress signals." He gave a weak laugh. "That your superpower?" I shrugged. "I guess I just needed a reason to move." We didn't talk after that. The wind filled the silence, rustling above us like a warning or a blessing. When the cabin finally came into view, Nathan let out a breath of relief. "Looks cozier than the tent I abandoned." "It's not much," I said, "but it's warm, and it has whiskey." "Then it's heaven." Inside, the light was softer, filtered through dusty window panes, casting a gold sheen on everything. I helped him onto the couch, his body slumping gratefully against the cushions. His eyes fluttered closed for a second, then opened again, still fogged with fatigue. "You sure you're okay?" I asked. He nodded, ankles angry. "But I'll live." I moved to the bathroom, pulled the small first aid kit from the cabinet, and knelt beside him again. "Boot off," I said gently. "Let me see." He hesitated. "It's not pretty. He's seen worse." He gritted his teeth and pulled. The boot slid off with effort, revealing a swollen, purple ankle that looked anything but walkable. I winced. He noticed. "See, I didn't say it wasn't bad, just that I've seen worse." He smirked. "Fair." I began cleaning the scratches on his shin, my fingers brushing against the heat of his skin, his body reacting subtly, muscles flinching, breath catching. He didn't move away. "You live out here?" I asked, needing something to cut through the closeness. He shook his head. "Not exactly. I travel a lot, do off-grid training for wilderness survival." I glanced up. "Professional adventurer." "Something like that. Most days I'm just trying to stay out of my own head." I didn't reply. I understood that too well once his leg was wrapped. I reached for the bottle of bourbon stashed on the shelf. "Medicinal," I said, pouring 2 fingers worth into a glass. He accepted it with a grateful nod. "Emily Harper. You might be my favorite stranger." I smiled. "Get used to it." We sat there, side by side on the couch. The fire crackled. The room slowly filled with a warmth that wasn't just from the flames. "You don't strike me as the mountain hermit type," he said eventually. I let out a dry laugh. "That obvious?" "A little." He looked at me, then really looked. "What are you running from?" I stared into my glass, then at the fire, then back at him. "Not sure anymore. Might just be myself." He nodded like he understood. And maybe he did. He didn't push, didn't ask more, just sat quietly beside me, like someone who knew how much silence could heal if shared. Outside, night pressed in. Inside, the couch no longer felt so wide, and I no longer felt so far from home. I wasn't sure what made me more nervous, his injury, or the fact that he didn't feel like a stranger anymore. Nathan stretched his leg out across the couch, one hand resting lightly on the bandage I'd wrapped just an hour ago. The tension in his jaw had softened, but there was still a tightness around his eyes, not just from pain. I moved to the small kitchenette needed to do something, anything. Otherwise, I'd keep staring. The kettle clicked on. I grabbed 2 chipped mugs from the shelf, the ones with faded pine cones on them. This place had its charm, but tonight it felt like a set, like the kind of scene you'd build in your mind when you wanted life to feel less hollow. Behind me, he shifted, winced. I turned before I could stop myself. "You okay?" He nodded. "Yeah, just stiff. I'll be fine by morning." "You say that like it's a promise." He smirked, more like wishful thinking. The tea was ready. I poured it slowly, the steam curling up like breath in cold air. "You want honey?" "Sure, if you have it." I brought the mugs over, our fingers brushed when he took his, just barely, but enough. We drank in silence for a while. It wasn't awkward, just full, like the space had shifted. "I don't usually do this," I said finally. He looked at me. "Invite injured strangers into your mountain hideaway." I smiled. "Something like that. You don't have to explain." His voice was low, even, but not indifferent still. I felt the need to say it anyway. "It's been a while since I let someone close, even like this, even just sharing space." He didn't respond at first, just sipped his tea, then set it down, then looked straight at me. "There's something about being hurt that makes you honest. Pain strips things away. What's left, it's real. Doesn't always make sense, but it's real." I nodded slowly. Let the words settle. He reached down and gently lifted the edge of his flannel shirt, revealing more scratches, raw, red. They weren't life-threatening, but they looked like they stung. "Let me clean those," I said, already rising. "Emily, it's okay. I want to." He didn't argue, didn't move, just watched as I brought the first aid kit back over, sat beside him, and opened the bottle of antiseptic. The scent hit first, sharp, medical. It clashed with the smell of pine and firewood, but not in a bad way, like reality brushing against a dream. I dabbed a cotton pad, pressed it gently to the skin above his hip. He flinched, but didn't pull away. "Sorry," I whispered. He shook his head. "It's fine, just cold." I worked in silence, tried to focus, tried not to notice the way his breath slowed under my touch, tried not to feel how close we were. But every swipe of the pad felt like a question I didn't know how to ask. And every answer was somewhere in the way he kept looking at me. When I finished, I sat back, closed the kit. Our eyes met. And something unspoken hung there, not heavy, not tense, just there. "I should sleep on the couch," he said. I nodded. "Okay." But neither of us moved. The fire popped, the cabin sighed, and for a long time we just breathed. Then I stood, picked up our mugs, turned off the lamp. "Good night, Nathan." "Good night, Emily." But his voice lingered longer than the words, and so did the feeling, like maybe the silence wasn't empty anymore. Maybe it was waiting. I woke up before the sun, not because of a sound or a nightmare, but because I felt warm, not just from the blankets, but from something inside me that hadn't stirred in a long time. I lay still, listening. The fire had died to a low glow. The cabin was quiet, but not hollow, not like yesterday. I turned on my side, half expecting the other side of the bed to be filled. It wasn't. Of course it was. Nathan was out on the couch, but my body remembered his weight against mine from when I helped him through the trees, his breath at my neck, his arm resting across my shoulder. I pressed my palm to my chest, right where the ache had settled in. It wasn't pain, it was something blooming, something terrifying. I slipped out of bed quietly, padded down the hall. The floor was cool against my feet. Nathan was asleep on the couch, one arm flung over his eyes, his chest rising slow and steady. Even in sleep, he looked like someone who had made peace with the wilderness. I watched him longer than I should have, then turned away, started the kettle, opened the windows a crack. The morning air rushed in cold, pine sweet, real. I needed real. I made tea and brought it over to the table. Let it sit untouched. My fingers drifted to the journal I'd packed, but hadn't opened in months. I flipped through pages filled with old thoughts, sharp-edged words, wounds I hadn't let close. And suddenly, there was a knock, not at the door. From behind, a gentle one on the wall, I turned. Nathan was sitting up slowly, wincing as he adjusted his leg. "Hey," he said, voice rough with sleep. "Didn't mean to startle you." "You didn't." I stood. "You want coffee?" "Only if it's strong enough to wake the dead." I smiled, poured a cup, brought it over. He took it with a grateful sigh, cradling it like it was more than caffeine. "You sleep okay?" I asked. He nodded. "Best sleep I've had in weeks. Even with a busted ankle." He looked at me, right at me. Something flickered in his eyes. Not heat, not want, but something deeper. "Especially with a busted ankle." I sat across from him, wrapped my hands around my own mug. The silence between us was softer today, like a thread that had been pulled tight, but not snapped. "What brought you out here?" I asked. He shrugged. "Needed to get lost for a while. Sometimes being found is scarier than being alone." I nodded. "I know that feeling." He leaned back, winced, sipped. "I used to think pain made me sharp, like it was armor. But sometimes it just makes you tired." My throat tightened. I swallowed. We sat there for what felt like an hour, no clock ticking, just the wind, the trees, and the sound of two people treeing to learn how to sit with themselves in front of someone else. And in that stillness, I realized something. I wasn't scared of him. I was scared of what I wanted, of what I might feel if I let go. But maybe that's exactly what I needed to do. Not leap, not fall, just loosen the grip. Let something in, let someone stay. By the time the sky turned silver, the air inside the cabin had grown warmer than I expected, not from the fire, but from the way we had begun to drift closer without realizing it. Nathan had moved to the armchair by the window, his leg propped up, a blanket slung across his lap like it belonged there. He looked at ease, like he'd always known how to make a space feel like home. I watched him from the kitchen table, pretending to scroll through the same page of my tablet for 20 minutes. But I wasn't reading. I was memorizing the lines of his face, how his hair caught the light, how his fingers absent-mindedly tapped against the ceramic mug in rhythm with the wind. I still can't believe I found you out there, I said finally. My voice surprised us both. It broke the quiet without shattering it. He smiled, soft and crooked. I'm glad you did. I don't usually go running into the woods when I hear shouting. Then I'm lucky, or you're brave. I laughed once short. I think I was just tired of hiding. His gaze held mine for a second too long, and something unspoken passed between us. Not lust, not even desire, but recognition. He looked away first, back at the window. What happens when you stop hiding? He asked. Do things get easier? No, I said, but they start to feel real. He nodded slowly, like he understood, like he'd been waiting to hear someone say that. The sun was nearly down. The shadows stretched long across the wooden floor. I stood, reached for the cabinet beneath the sink, and pulled out the bottle of vodka I'd been saving not for guests, but for emergencies. I held it up. Painkiller. He grinned. You read my mind. I poured 2 shots, brought them over. We clinked glasses. To survival, he said. To feeling something again, I replied. The vodka hit hard, sharp, immediate. It burned its way down, but didn't settle, not really. He leaned back, exhaling. I haven't been this still in months. Stillness isn't the same as peace, I said. He glanced at me, eyes darker now, not from drink, but from memory. No, but sometimes it's the only way to hear yourself think. Outside, the last of the light disappeared. The forest turned black inside. The cabin hummed quietly, the way a room does when it holds too much of what can't be said out loud. I gathered the empty glasses. He stretched, wincing only a little. You should take the bed, I said. It's warmer in there. And I'm not as fragile as I look. I'll survive the couch. You're not fragile at all, he said. I didn't know how to respond to that, so I just smiled. I helped him to the bedroom, guided him slowly, his arm over my shoulder again, like the first night. But now there was something different. The air around us wasn't just quiet. It was charged. I pulled back the covers, fluffed the pillows. He sat carefully, exhaling as he sank into the mattress. Thank you, he said, his voice quieter than before. You're welcome. I turned to go, but stopped at the door. If you need anything, I'll call out, he said, a small smile. Worked the first time. I chuckled, nodded, left the door slightly open, back on the couch. I wrapped myself in the old quilt, tried to read again. But the words blurred. My mind replayed every moment, the brush of his hand, the way he looked at me when I said his name. I closed the tablet, turned off the lamp, let the darkness take over. But it didn't feel like being alone, not anymore, not tonight. It started with a whisper, a shift in the quiet, not a word, not even a breath. Just the feeling that something had changed. The fire had burned low, only embers now, flickering softly against the stone hearth like fading memories. I sat up slowly, the quilt slipping down my arms. The room glowed faint orange, warm and low, like the hush of candlelight. A door creaked gently, his footsteps, careful, uneven. Then the soft scrape of his knuckles against the hallway wall. Nathan. His voice came back to me low. thick with hesitation. I couldn't sleep. Neither could I. I stood, met him in the middle of the space between the kitchen and the couch, where the fire's light curved against our faces, and the silence breathed between us. He was barefoot, hair tousled, a quiet look in his eyes, like he was searching for something, didn't know how to ask for. I didn't speak, didn't ask. Instead, I stepped closer, just close enough to feel his warmth before our hands met, fingers, light at first, testing the shape of this stillness between us, then slowly intertwining. There was no rush, no sudden lurch of passion, only gravity soft and sure, like a river bending toward what it always knew was waiting. We moved together, as if led by some current. His hand brushed my cheek, a gentle arc of electricity, beneath skin grown too used to its own silence. I let my head fall forward, resting briefly against his shoulder, as if the ache in my chest needed somewhere to lean. He wrapped his arms around me, and in that embrace, the weight I'd carried for over a year began to loosen its grip, not all at once, but enough. The world outside shrank. No Brooklyn, no emails, no anniversaries missed, no photographs of someone younger in my place. Just this warmth, this stillness. This man who saw me without asking me to explain. We didn't speak, didn't need to in that quiet. The air thickened, not with expectation, but with presence, with the pulse of two lives brushing against something neither one had planned. He leaned his forehead to mine. Our breath met in the space between. And time folded, paused, held in the hush of that moment. The fire flared once, bright, unexpected, then settled again, just as we did, two people no longer lost. Not entirely, not tonight. Morning came slow. Soft gray light spilled across the floor like a secret. I stirred beneath the covers, my body warm, my breath steady. For a moment, I didn't remember where I was, or what day it was, only the memory of warmth, of closeness. I reached across the bed, half asleep, expecting to find him there. But the sheets were cool, untouched. I sat up, blinking the haze from my eyes, listening. No footsteps, no voice from the kitchen, no soft thud of a mug being placed on the counter. The cabin was quiet again. That old, hollow quiet. I slipped from bed, wrapped the blanket around my shoulders, made my way to the living room. The couch was empty, pillow fluffed, blanket folded, as if he'd never been there. My heart stumbled. I checked the bathroom, the porch, called his name once, quietly, not really expecting a reply. Nothing. A breeze crept through the window. I'd forgotten to latch. Outside, the trees whispered like they knew something I didn't. On the table, his mug still sat half full, steam long gone. I pressed my hand to the ceramic, cold. He was gone. I stepped out into the yard, barefoot in the frost-laced grass, called again. Nathan, just the wind, just the trees. I followed the path down the hill, my feet numb, my chest tightening. The forest swallowed me faster this time. No voices to follow, no warmth to chase. Only footprints, faint, melting into the wet ground, leading toward the stream. I followed them until they disappeared into moss and mud. He was really gone. I stood there, alone in the hush of the woods, trying not to let the tears come, trying not to feel abandoned all over again. But it wasn't the same. This wasn't Ryan. This wasn't betrayal. It was something else, something I hadn't expected to need until I'd tasted it. A connection. Brief, unplanned, but real. I walked back slowly. The sky had cleared, sunlight cracked through the trees in long golden ribbons. At the cabin, I opened the door, stood in the threshold. Let the air wrap around me. Everything was still in place. Nothing was broken, except maybe my idea of what it meant to be alone. Because now, even in the silence, I could still feel him in the warmth of the mug, in the flannel folded neatly by the couch, in the way my heart had made space for someone it knew wouldn't stay. And somehow, that space didn't feel empty. It felt like something had passed through it and left it wider, softer, changed. I spent the rest of that morning moving slowly, not out of sadness. Not really. It was something quieter, a stillness I hadn't known I needed. The cabin looked untouched, exactly as it had before Nathan arrived. And yet, everything felt rearranged. I made the bed, straightened the rug, folded the blanket he'd used, small things. But they mattered now, like symbols. When I opened the kitchen window, a gust of crisp mountain air swept through, lifting the scent of pine and wood smoke into something almost sweet. I let it in. The tea kettle hissed softly behind me. I poured a mug, held it close, but didn't drink. Instead, I walked back to the table and pulled out my journal. It had been collecting dust since long before the trip. Its spine cracked when I opened it, a sound that felt like exhaling. The last entry was dated 8 months ago. A page full of bitterness, anger, the kind that lingers when you try too hard to be unaffected. I didn't rip it out. I let it stay, as a reminder of what I'd carried. Then I turned the page and began. The pen moved slowly at first, just a line or two, then more, not about him, not directly, but about what it meant to be seen, even for a moment. About the way one night could remind you that your heart still knows how to soften. I wrote until the tea turned cold, until the light in the cabin shifted and the shadows leaned across the floor later. I gathered my coat and walked the trail behind the ridge. The same path I'd followed that first day, chasing a voice through the trees. This time, there was no urgency, no need to save anyone, only the need to move, to feel my own weight in the world again. The forest was quiet, but not lonely, not anymore. I paused at the bend where his voice had first echoed, closed my eyes. For a second, I swore I could still hear it, not in my ears, in the space he'd left behind that night. I lit the fire again, not out of necessity, but because I wanted the room to feel alive. I cooked something simple, poured a small glass of wine, and sat by the window, watching the last light slip behind the ridge. The ache in my chest hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. It wasn't sharp anymore, just tender. like a scar that no longer hurt to touch. And in that quiet hour, with the flames dancing and the forest breathing outside, I realized something I hadn't dared believe for a long time. I wasn't waiting for someone to come back. I was finally learning how to stay with myself, with the silence, with everything I'd survived. And it was enough. When I returned to Brooklyn, nothing had changed. The streets still buzzed. The sirens still sang their broken lullabies. Coffee shops overflowed with people pretending not to be lonely. And my apartment still smelled faintly of old books and lavender detergent. But I was different. The cabin wasn't magic. Nathan wasn't a miracle. But something had shifted in me, quiet and certain, like the way the earth moves underfoot when no one's watching. I unpacked slowly, let the scent of pine cling to my coat a little longer. I didn't want to lose it just yet. My desk sat by the window, just where I'd left it, the screen dark, my email unopened. I didn't turn it on. Instead, I pulled out the stack of scribbled notes from the journal, pages written by firelight thoughts that didn't ask permission. And I began to type, not a novel, not even an article, something smaller, truer, a new column, solitude and wildness, stories about leaving, about staying, about the aching, holy middle where most of us live. The first piece was about the cabin, but not about him, about the cold, the silence, the way the trees held secrets without ever offering advice, about how healing isn't loud or clean or pretty. It's messy, soft, a long conversation with yourself you never meant to start. The article went live the next week. Responses came in like wind through an open window, quiet, but steady. People thanked me, said they'd felt it too, said they didn't know how to name the emptiness until someone else did first. I didn't reply to most of them, but I read every word. One afternoon, during a reading event downtown, I stood at a podium and told a room of strangers that sometimes the most important person you meet on a journey is the version of yourself who finally stops running. Afterwards, a man lingered by the back door, tall, dark hair, worn boots. For a moment, my chest tightened. But when he turned, he was Nathan. He nodded politely, then disappeared into the crowd. I smiled. It didn't hurt, not anymore, because what he gave me wasn't about staying. It was about seeing. And I'd finally learned how to see myself again, not in someone else's eyes, but in the reflection of still water, in the quiet corners of my apartment, in the spaces I used to fill with noise. The city hadn't changed, but now I carried the woods inside me, a place I could return to whenever I needed to remember. I was never truly lost, only waiting to be found by me. The cafe was quiet that morning. Soft jazz spilled from the speakers. Outside, the city moved like it always did, rushed, impatient, loud. But in here, time slowed. I sat by the window, a notebook open in front of me, a pen resting against the edge, not typing today, just writing, letting the ink carry what the screen couldn't hold. The barista knew my name now, knew I liked my coffee with oat milk, knew I didn't take calls during the first hour of daylight. I'd carved out a new rhythm, a new kind of silence, not the hollow kind, the nourishing kind. Outside, a man walked past in a flannel shirt, dark hair, long stride. For a breath, my heart paused, but he didn't look in. And it wasn't him still. I smiled. I looked down at the words I'd written, not an article, not a story, a letter to no one and someone, to the man who walked out of the woods. Not because he left, but because of what he left behind, the spark, the echo, the reminder that I could still open, still feel, still be more than the scars. I wrote slowly, "Thank you for arriving when you did, for letting me be kind again, for reminding me that connection doesn't have to last forever to change everything." I paused, then added one last line. "If love doesn't stay, but leaves you softer, wider, more awake, isn't that love, too?" I closed the notebook, folded the page, tucked it between the worn covers. Outside, the sun caught on the rooftop glass. The city breathed. And so did I, not waiting, not searching, just living with the memory of a man I never really had to lose, because he'd already given me back to myself.